Part 1, Chapter 1. The novel opens in the sweltering heat of early July in St. Petersburg. We meet Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov, a former university student living in extreme poverty in a tiny, cramped garret room. His living conditions are deplorable. His room is more like a cupboard than a proper dwelling, barely large enough to contain his shabby furniture. Raskolnikov emerges from his room feeling anxious and preoccupied. He is deeply in debt to his landlady, to whom he also owes several months of rent. His fear of encountering her on the stairs has become so intense that he now feels ashamed of his own cowardice. As he descends, he manages to slip past her door unnoticed, which provides him temporary relief. Once outside, Raskolnikov begins walking through the oppressive St. Petersburg streets. His clothing is in tatters, his hat is worn and peculiar-looking, and his overall appearance draws occasional stares from passers-by. Despite his poverty and shabby state, he possesses a striking handsomeness and a proud bearing that seems incongruous with his circumstances. His destination is the apartment of an old pawnbroker woman, Alyona Ivanovna. This is not his first visit. He has been there before to pawn items. However, this particular visit serves a different purpose. It is a reconnaissance mission, a rehearsal for something far more sinister that he has been contemplating. The nature of this rehearsal is not yet fully revealed, but the reader senses something ominous in Raskolnikov's thoughts and manner. When he arrives at the pawnbroker's building, he carefully observes every detail: the number of steps on the staircase, the layout of the apartment, the location of the kitchen. The old woman, Alyona Ivanovna, is described as tiny, around 60 years old, with sharp, malicious eyes. She wears a flannel rag around her neck despite the heat, and her dwelling smells unpleasant. Raskolnikov pawns a cheap silver watch, all the while studying the woman and her apartment with intense focus. She is suspicious and miserly, giving him very little money for the watch. During this transaction, he notices where she keeps her keys and observes that she wears them around her neck. He also becomes aware that her younger half-sister, Lizaveta, lives with her but is currently absent. After leaving the pawnbroker's apartment, Raskolnikov feels disgusted with himself. He stops at a tavern, which is unusual for him as he rarely drinks. There he encounters Marmeladov, a former government clerk who has fallen into alcoholism and destitution. What follows is one of the most memorable scenes in the novel. Marmeladov, despite being a stranger, begins to pour out his life story to Raskolnikov. He speaks with a mixture of shame, self-awareness, and a peculiar pride in his own degradation. He tells of his marriage to Katerina Ivanovna, a widow with 3 children from a previous marriage. Katerina came from a respectable family and had been educated in a noble institute, but circumstances had reduced her to desperate poverty. Marmeladov explains how his drinking has destroyed his family. Despite securing a position through the help of his patron, he lost the job due to his alcoholism. The family situation became so dire that his daughter from a previous marriage, Sofia Semyonovna, was forced to obtain a yellow ticket, the passport that identified her as a registered prostitute. This revelation is delivered with tremendous pathos. Marmeladov describes how the gentle, educated Sonia sacrificed herself to support her stepmother and step-siblings. The old clerk speaks of his wife's tuberculosis, her desperation, her rage at his drinking, and her beating of the children in her frustration. He describes a recent incident where Sonia brought home 30 rubles, money earned through prostitution, and how Katerina Ivanovna, in a moment that combined gratitude, shame, and anguish, kissed Sonia's feet. Marmeladov's monologue is a masterpiece of psychological revelation. He speaks of his awareness of his own worthlessness, his inability to stop drinking despite knowing it destroys his family, and his desperate hope for divine mercy. He imagines a final judgment where Christ will forgive even people like him, saying that his suffering has been punishment enough. After this lengthy confession, Marmeladov asks Raskolnikov to escort him home. They arrive at a tenement building and climb to the Marmeladov apartment. The scene that greets them is one of complete squalor. Katerina Ivanovna is in the midst of a coughing fit, blood on her handkerchief, a sign of her advancing tuberculosis. The 3 children are huddled in terror. When Katerina sees her drunken husband, she begins to berate him furiously, eventually pulling him by the hair. Raskolnikov, moved by the scene and perhaps by some impulse he doesn't fully understand, leaves money on the windowsill, almost all he has, and quickly departs. As he walks home, he immediately regrets this gesture, thinking bitterly that he needs the money himself. Chapter 2. Raskolnikov returns to his miserable room to find a letter from his mother waiting for him. This letter, one of the most important documents in the novel, provides crucial background information and sets up several major plot developments. His mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, writes from their provincial home. The letter is filled with maternal concern, anxious questioning about his welfare, and news that reveals the desperate circumstances of Raskolnikov's family. She apologizes for not being able to send money earlier and explains why. The bulk of the letter concerns Raskolnikov's younger sister, Dunya Avdiya Romanovna. Dunya had been working as a governess in the household of the Svidrigaïlovs, Marfa Petrovna and her husband Arkady Ivanovich. The letter reveals that Arkady Svidrigaïlov made improper advances toward Dunya, which she firmly rejected. However, Marfa Petrovna initially believed her husband's lies that Dunya had encouraged him, and Dunya was dismissed in disgrace. The scandal spread throughout the province, damaging Dunya's reputation severely. Eventually, Arkady Svidrigaïlov confessed the truth to his wife. Marfa Petrovna, consumed with remorse, set about clearing Dunya's name. She traveled to various houses in the province, showing everyone a letter in which Dunya had rejected Svidrigaïlov's advances and publicly proclaiming Dunya's innocence and virtue. The letter then reveals the most consequential news. Dunya has accepted a marriage proposal from Fyodor Petrovich Luzhin, a distant relative of Marfa Petrovna. Luzhin is described as a lawyer and businessman who is 45 years old and making his way in the world. Though not wealthy, he has his own business and some capital. Pulcheria Alexandrovna's description of Luzhin contains several warning signs, though she seems not to recognize them fully. She mentions that he is vain, self-important, and overly concerned with his own opinions. He had only briefly met Dunya before proposing and has stipulated various conditions for the marriage. He insists that the wedding take place quickly and that Dunya come to St. Petersburg with her mother as soon as possible. The mother's letter reveals the family's calculation. Luzhin may not be ideal, but he represents security and, more importantly, an opportunity for Raskolnikov. The family hopes that Luzhin might help Raskolnikov enter his business and secure his future. This is clearly Dunya's primary motivation. She is sacrificing herself for her brother. The letter concludes with the news that Pulcheria and Dunya will arrive in St. Petersburg very soon, perhaps in just a few days. The mother pleads with Raskolnikov not to judge Dunya's decision harshly and expresses her faith that this marriage will secure the happiness of all of them. Reading this letter, Raskolnikov is thrown into emotional turmoil. He recognizes immediately that Dunya is sacrificing herself just as Sonya Marmeladova sacrificed herself. The parallel is exact and devastating. His sister is selling herself, albeit through legal marriage rather than prostitution, to save him and the family. He paces his room in agitation, his mind racing through the implications. He understands that Luzhin is choosing Dunya precisely because she is poor and in his debt. This will give him power over her. A wealthy wife would be his equal. A poor one will be grateful and subservient. The marriage is essentially a transaction, and Dunya is the commodity. Raskolnikov's thoughts become increasingly fevered. He imagines confronting Luzhin, rejecting the sacrifice, refusing to allow his sister to degrade herself. But he also recognizes his own helplessness. What can he offer as an alternative? He is nothing, can provide nothing for his mother and sister. His mind returns obsessively to his project, the plan that has been consuming him. The chapter ends with Raskolnikov in a state of intense psychological crisis, the various pressures of his situation combining to push him toward a decision point. Chapter 3. Raskolnikov leaves his room in a disturbed state and wanders the streets, his mind churning. His thoughts are fragmented, moving between his family's situation, the repulsive Luzhin, and his own desperate circumstances. He feels trapped in a maze of poverty and impossible choices. As he walks, he notices a young girl, probably about 15 years old, sitting on a bench. She appears to be drunk or drugged, her clothing disheveled, clearly in a vulnerable state. Raskolnikov observes a well-dressed, stout gentleman watching the girl with predatory interest. The man's intentions are obvious and sinister. Raskolnikov intervenes, approaching a policeman and pointing out the situation. He gives the policeman some money to ensure the girl gets home safely. The policeman agrees to help, and for a moment, Raskolnikov feels he has done something good. However, his mood quickly shifts. He suddenly asks himself why he bothered to intervene. What difference does it make? Let everyone do as they wish, he thinks bitterly. This cynical turn reflects his disturbed mental state. He oscillates between compassion and a nihilistic rejection of all moral concern. He continues walking and eventually finds himself on the bank of the Never River, near the islands. The setting is described with particular attention to its beauty: the green spaces, the fresh air, the absence of the city's oppressive atmosphere. Raskolnikov lies down on the grass, exhausted both physically and mentally. He falls into a deep sleep and has a vivid, disturbing dream. This dream sequence is one of the most powerful and symbolic passages in the novel. In the dream, Raskolnikov is a child of 7, walking with his father past a tavern on the edge of town. There is a large cart hitched to a small, worn-out mare. The cart's owner, a drunk peasant named Mikolka, invites people to climb aboard for a ride. The cart becomes overloaded with rowdy, drunk passengers. The exhausted mare cannot pull the heavy load. Mikolka begins beating the animal with a whip, then with a shaft, working himself into a frenzy. Other men join in the beating. The child Raskolnikov watches in horror as the mare is beaten to death, her eyes pleading, her body convulsing under the blows. The child runs to the dying horse, throws his arms around her bleeding head, and kisses her. He then attacks Mikolka in a fury. His father pulls him away, and the child, sobbing, asks why they killed the poor horse. Raskolnikov wakes from this dream in a state of horror and revulsion. He interprets the dream as a message, a warning from his unconscious. Can it be that I really shall take an axe, strike her on the head, smash her skull, that I shall slip in the sticky, warm blood? Good God, can it be? The dream has brought his buried intentions to the surface. He feels as though a burden has been lifted. Surely, he thinks, he could never go through with such an act now that he has confronted its full horror in the dream. He experiences a moment of relief, feeling free from the obsession that has possessed him. He prays for the first time in a long while, asking God to show him the right path and to release him from his accursed dream. He walks on, feeling lighter, as though a great weight has been removed from his soul. Chapter 4. Still in this relieved state, Raskolnikov continues walking through the city. He decides to visit his friend Razumikin, whom he has been avoiding for months. Razumikin is a former fellow student, poor like Raskolnikov, but of a completely different temperament, energetic, optimistic, and determined to work his way up in the world through tutoring and translation work. However, as Raskolnikov walks toward Razumikin's apartment, his mind begins working against him again. He starts questioning his decision to visit his friend. What would he say? What would be the point? He finds himself unable to go through with the visit and turns back. It is at this moment that chance intervenes in a way that seems almost supernaturally significant. Passing through the Haymarket, Raskolnikov overhears a conversation between a young merchant and his wife. The wife mentions that Lizaveta Ivanovna, the pawnbroker's half-sister, will be out tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock to visit someone. This information strikes Raskolnikov like a thunderbolt. If Lizaveta is out, the old pawnbroker will be alone in the apartment. The opportunity he has been imagining, almost as an abstract possibility, is suddenly concrete and immediate. It is as though fate itself has intervened to make the crime possible. Raskolnikov is shaken by this coincidence. He had been trying to abandon his plan, to escape from the obsession, and now circumstances have conspired to put the opportunity directly in his path. He interprets this as a sign, though whether from God or the devil he cannot say. He returns to his room in a state of profound disturbance. His mind cannot let go of the overheard information. He lies down and falls into a kind of stupor, neither fully asleep nor awake. His thoughts become increasingly feverish and disjointed. Chapter 5. This chapter takes us deeper into Raskolnikov's tortured psychology. In his semi-conscious state, he reviews his theory, the intellectual framework he has constructed to justify the murder he is contemplating. The theory is based on a division of humanity into 2 categories. The majority of people are ordinary, bound by conventional morality, meant to live in obedience and reproduce. But there exists a minority of extraordinary individuals who have the right to transgress moral boundaries if their transgression serves a higher purpose. These extraordinary people, Napoleon is his primary example, make history and drive humanity forward. Raskolnikov has convinced himself that truly great individuals do not hesitate to step over obstacles, even if those obstacles are human lives. The question that torments him is which category he belongs to. Is he ordinary or extraordinary? Is he a Napoleon or merely a louse? He recognizes that the pawnbroker is a worthless creature. She is cruel, exploitative, of no use to anyone. Her death would benefit society. He could use her money to complete his education, support his family, and accomplish great things. One tiny crime would be redeemed by the good works that would follow. Yet even as he rehearses these arguments, something within him recoils. The dream of the beaten horse has revealed his deeper nature. He is compassionate, sensitive, horrified by violence. The conflict between his theory and his actual emotional constitution creates unbearable psychological tension. He continues to oscillate. One moment he is convinced he must go through with it, that it is his destiny. The next moment he is repulsed by the very thought, seeing it as madness. This vacillation is not rational deliberation, but rather a kind of psychological torture, his mind going in circles. The chapter conveys the peculiar mental state of someone on the edge of committing an irreversible act. Time seems to both speed up and slow down. Raskolnikov experiences moments of terrible clarity, alternating with periods of dissociation where his actions seem to belong to someone else. Chapter 6. The next day, the day of the planned murder, Raskolnikov wakes in a state of nervous exhaustion. He had not fully intended to go through with the act, yet he finds himself moving mechanically through the preparations. He examines the fake pledge he has prepared, a piece of wood wrapped carefully to look like a valuable cigarette case. This will serve as his pretext for visiting the pawnbroker. He also prepares the weapon. He removes a small axe from the kitchen when the cook is not looking, and he fashions a loop to carry it hidden under his coat. His movements are strange, almost somnambulistic. Later, he will barely remember these preparations. It is as though his body is acting while his conscious mind watches from a distance. This dissociative state is a crucial aspect of Dostoyevsky's psychological realism. Raskolnikov is not coolly executing a plan, but rather being carried along by forces within himself that he does not fully control. As the time approaches, he makes his way toward the pawnbroker's building. His thoughts are fragmentary, surreal. He notes details with strange intensity: the heat, the smell of the streets, the faces of passers-by, yet feels disconnected from everything. Chapter 7. Raskolnikov arrives at the pawnbroker's building at approximately 7:30 in the evening. He climbs the 13 steps to the 4th floor, his heart pounding so loudly he fears it can be heard. He rings the bell. Alyona Ivanovna opens the door cautiously, the chain still attached. She recognizes him and lets him in. Raskolnikov presents the fake pledge, and she begins to examine it, turning away from him. This is the moment. Raskolnikov removes the axe from its loop. With tremendous force, he brings the blade down on the old woman's skull. She falls without a sound. He strikes again and again, the blood flowing, until he is certain she is dead. What happens next occurs in a kind of fever dream. He searches for the keys around her neck, his hands shaking and covered in blood. He finds them and moves to the bedroom where he believes she keeps her valuables. He is rifling through her possessions, taking items somewhat randomly, when he hears a sound. Lizaveta, the pawnbroker's half-sister, has returned unexpectedly. She enters the apartment and sees the body of her sister lying in the blood. She stands frozen, her mouth open, unable to scream. Raskolnikov rushes at her with the axe raised. This second murder is entirely unplanned, a panicked response to being discovered. Lizaveta raises her arms in a feeble attempt to protect herself. He brings the axe down on her skull, killing her with a single blow. He stands in horror, looking at the two bodies. Lizaveta was innocent, gentle, the very person he had pitied. The plan was to kill only the wicked pawnbroker, but now he has murdered a blameless woman. The reality of what he has done crashes over him. He hears voices and footsteps on the stairs. Two men have come to visit the pawnbroker. They ring the bell, call out, try the door. Raskolnikov has forgotten to latch it after Lizaveta entered. The men push against the door and realize it is being held from inside. They become suspicious and go to fetch the caretaker. Raskolnikov is trapped in the apartment. His mind races. He considers various escape routes, but they all seem impossible. Then, by pure chance, the men leave to get help, and he is able to slip out and down the stairs, hiding in an empty apartment that is being renovated until he can make his escape. He manages to get out of the building and begins walking through the streets, the stolen items hidden on his person. He is in a daze, moving by instinct rather than conscious thought. He makes it back to his room, replaces the axe, and collapses onto his couch, pulling his coat over himself. Part 2. Chapter 1. Raskolnikov lies on his couch in a state between consciousness and delirium. He cannot tell how much time has passed, hours, days. He is aware of voices, people entering his room, fragments of conversation, but cannot fully grasp what is happening. His landlady's servant, Nastasia, comes in at some point. Then his friend Razumikin appears. There is a doctor, Zosimov, examining him. These figures move through his awareness like phantoms. He catches pieces of their conversations about his health, about money he owes, about a summons he has received from the police. This police summons causes him tremendous anxiety, even in his semi-conscious state. He imagines they have discovered the murder, that they are coming to arrest him. The fear mingles with his fever, creating nightmarish hallucinations. In his more lucid moments, he remembers the night of the murder in fragments. The sensation of the axe striking the skull, the blood, Lizaveta's terrified face, the frantic searching through the old woman's possessions, the panic when the men came to the door. These memories come in flashes, each one causing him physical revulsion. He also experiences moments of intense paranoia. Has he hidden the stolen items properly? Did he leave evidence behind? Are there bloodstains on his clothing? His mind goes through these questions obsessively, but his memory of what he did after returning home is unclear. Razumikin has taken it upon himself to care for his sick friend. Despite Raskolnikov's long neglect of their friendship, Razumikin shows genuine concern and loyalty. He brings food, arranges for the doctor, deals with the landlady. His cheerful, energetic presence contrasts sharply with Raskolnikov's tortured state. Doctor Zosimov examines Raskolnikov and determines that the illness is partly physical but largely psychological. There is fever, but there is also some deep mental disturbance. The doctor prescribes rest and nutrition, though he recognizes that something more fundamental is wrong with his patient. The summons from the police continues to torment Raskolnikov. Nastasia tells him it is about a debt, not anything criminal, but he cannot shake his fear. In his disturbed state, he is convinced they know everything. Chapter 2. Raskolnikov's fever breaks, and he becomes more lucid, though still weak. Razumikin continues to visit regularly, bringing news and attempting to cheer him up. He tells Raskolnikov about receiving money from Raskolnikov's mother and using it to buy him new clothes, as his old ones were little more than rags. Razumikin also mentions that he has started a translation business and wants to include Raskolnikov as a partner. He is full of enthusiastic plans for their future success. His optimism and energy stand in stark contrast to Raskolnikov's gloomy state. During one of these visits, Razumikin mentions that he has met Raskolnikov's mother and sister, who have arrived in St. Petersburg. He becomes animated when speaking of Dunya, clearly smitten with her. He describes her beauty, intelligence, and strength of character with great admiration. Raskolnikov learns that his family has taken rooms in the same building as Luzhin, Dunya's fiancé. Razumikin has already met Luzhin and formed a negative impression. He describes Luzhin as pompous, self-important, and controlling. He suggests that Dunya might not be fully happy with her choice, though she defends her fiancé. The mention of his mother and sister causes Raskolnikov great agitation. He is not ready to face them. The knowledge of what he has done makes the thought of seeing them unbearable. He oscillates between longing for his family and desperate fear of their presence. Zosimov, the doctor, continues to observe Raskolnikov with professional interest. He notes the patient's extreme psychological volatility, the sudden mood swings, the intense emotional reactions to seemingly minor stimuli, the periods of dissociation. To Zosimov, this is a fascinating case of mental disturbance, though he does not guess its true cause. Raskolnikov must also deal with the police summons. He learns that it concerns money he owes to his landlady, not the murder. However, he decides he must go to the police station to respond to the summons. The thought fills him with dread, but he cannot avoid it without arousing suspicion. Chapter 3. Raskolnikov forces himself to go to the police station to respond to the summons. He is still weak from his illness and walks through the streets in a state of extreme anxiety. Every person he passes seems to look at him suspiciously. He imagines that his guilt is written on his face. At the police station, he encounters various officials and clerks. The atmosphere is bureaucratic and impersonal, which somehow makes it more frightening. He is directed to the office of Ilya Petrovich, a police official who will handle his case. While waiting, Raskolnikov becomes aware of a conversation about the murder of the pawnbroker. Two men are discussing the crime, mentioning that the police have arrested two men, painters who were working in a room in the building at the time. These men, Nikolai and Dmitri, are suspected because they tried to pawn items at another pawnbroker's shop, and their behavior had been suspicious. Raskolnikov listens to this conversation in a state of shock. The police have arrested the wrong men. Innocent people are being held for his crime. This realization creates a complex mixture of relief and guilt. He is safe, but at the cost of others' freedom. He is called into the office and deals with the matter of the debt. The interview goes smoothly enough, though he is in a state of extreme nervous tension throughout. Just as he is about to leave, having successfully dealt with the summons, he makes a crucial error. He asks casually about the murder of the pawnbroker, trying to appear only slightly curious. But his manner is too intense, his interest too obvious. Porfiry Petrovich, the investigating magistrate, is not present at this moment, but other officials notice Raskolnikov's excessive interest in the case. One of them mentions the blood found at the scene, and Raskolnikov nearly faints. He manages to leave the police station, but as he walks down the street, he becomes dizzy and disoriented. He feels he has revealed too much, that he has marked himself as suspicious. The stress is too much for his weakened constitution, and he collapses in the street. Chapter 4. When Raskolnikov regains consciousness, he is back in his room. Razumikhin is there, concerned and puzzled by his friend's strange behavior. Also present is Zosimov, the doctor, and a new character named Zamyatov, a young clerk from the police station. Raskolnikov, still in a state of feverish agitation, begins to behave very strangely. He makes cryptic, almost mocking comments. His tone varies between hostile and friendly, making those around him uncomfortable. He seems to be deliberately trying to provoke suspicion while also wanting to confess. Zamyatov, the police clerk, has heard about Raskolnikov's odd behavior at the police station, his excessive interest in the murder, and his near-fainting spell. He watches Raskolnikov carefully, trying to determine if there is something wrong beyond mere illness. Raskolnikov, in turn, watches Zamyatov, seeming to test him to see how much he suspects. The interaction is filled with tension, though the others in the room do not fully understand what is happening between these two. The conversation turns to the murder case. Raskolnikov engages eagerly, offering theories about how the crime was committed and how the criminal might have hidden the stolen goods. His knowledge seems too detailed, his interest too intense. He appears to be playing a dangerous game, coming close to revealing himself while maintaining plausible deniability. Razumikhin tries to change the subject, worried about his friend's mental state. Zosimov attributes Raskolnikov's strange behavior to his illness and suggests he needs more rest. But Zamyatov is becoming increasingly suspicious. Chapter 5. Raskolnikov suddenly announces that he wants to attend a housewarming party at Razumikhin's new apartment. Despite his weakness and everyone's objections, he insists on going. His behavior becomes increasingly erratic and concerning. Before going to the party, however, he makes an unexpected visit to his mother and sister. The reunion is emotionally charged. His mother embraces him with tears, while Dunya looks at him with concern. They can see that something is deeply wrong with him. The meeting is awkward and painful. Raskolnikov is loving toward them one moment, harsh and dismissive the next. He criticizes Dunya's engagement to Luzhin in brutal terms, telling her plainly that she is sacrificing herself and that he will not accept such a sacrifice. His words are accurate but cruel in their delivery. Pulcheria Alexandrovna tries to defend Luzhin, to explain the reasons for the match, but Raskolnikov cuts her off. He makes it clear that he sees through Luzhin's character and motivations. He also makes cryptic references to his own situation, speaking in ways that alarm his mother and sister without fully explaining himself. The visit ends tensely, with Raskolnikov abruptly leaving. His mother and sister are left confused and worried, unable to understand what has happened to him. Raskolnikov then goes to the party at Razumikhin's apartment. There he continues to behave strangely, making inappropriate comments and acting erratically. At one point, he announces to the gathering that he knows where the stolen goods from the pawnbroker's murder are hidden, a clearly false claim meant to shock and provoke. Chapter 6. After leaving the party, Raskolnikov wanders the streets in a state of mental anguish. He finds himself drawn back to the pawnbroker's building, compelled by some force he doesn't understand to revisit the scene of his crime. He climbs the stairs to the 4th floor and rings the bell of the apartment. Painters are renovating the space now, and they look at him strangely. He asks to see where the blood was, making comments about the murder. His behavior is bizarre and troubling. The painters become uncomfortable and ask him to leave. From there, Raskolnikov goes to a tavern, the Crystal Palace, where he again encounters Zamyatov, the police clerk. In a remarkable scene, Raskolnikov engages in what amounts to a game of psychological chicken with the young clerk. He brings up the murder case and begins to describe, hypothetically, how the murderer might have committed the crime. His description is so detailed and accurate that it could only come from someone who was actually there. He speaks of the psychological state of the murderer, the panic, the hiding of the goods, in a way that is clearly autobiographical. Zamyatov listens with growing alarm. The conversation becomes a kind of confession masked as speculation. Raskolnikov seems to want to reveal himself while maintaining the thinnest pretense of discussing a hypothetical case. Finally, Raskolnikov asks Zamyatov directly, "What if it was I who murdered the old woman and Lizaveta?" The question is asked in a tone that could be either serious or mocking. Zamyatov is thoroughly unsettled but cannot determine if Raskolnikov is actually confessing or simply playing a disturbing game. Raskolnikov leaves the tavern, leaving Zamyatov shaken and confused. He walks through the city until he comes to a bridge. For a moment, he considers throwing himself into the water. The impulse toward self-destruction is strong, but something holds him back. Chapter 7. As Raskolnikov stands on the bridge, lost in dark thoughts, he witnesses a dramatic scene. A carriage accident occurs, and a man is badly injured. People gather around the victim, and Raskolnikov recognizes him. It is Marmeladov, the drunken clerk he had met in the tavern at the beginning of the novel. Marmeladov has been run over by a carriage and is critically injured. Raskolnikov takes charge of the situation with unexpected energy and compassion. He helps carry Marmeladov to his apartment and summons a doctor. He even gives the family money to help with medical expenses. The Marmeladov apartment is a scene of chaos and tragedy. Katerina Ivanovna is frantic, her illness exacerbated by the stress. The three children huddle in terror. Sonia is sent for and arrives in her gaudy prostitute's clothing, her face painted, looking desperately out of place in her father's dying chamber. The doctor examines Marmeladov and delivers the verdict. The injuries are fatal, and death will come within the hour. Marmeladov, semi-conscious, asks forgiveness from his wife and daughter. Katerina Ivanovna, despite her anger and resentment, weeps over him. Sonia kneels by his bedside, and he dies asking for her forgiveness. This scene has a profound effect on Raskolnikov. He is moved by the genuine grief, by Sonia's devotion to her horrible father, by the family's tragedy. For the first time since the murder, he feels connected to humanity, touched by compassion rather than consumed by his own thoughts. He meets Sonia briefly during this terrible event. She looks at him with gratitude for his help. Something passes between them, a recognition, though neither can articulate what it means. Raskolnikov leaves the Marmeladov apartment with a strange new feeling. Despite his exhaustion and his own terrible situation, he feels a kind of renewal. He decides to confess his crime and accept the consequences. He will tell Dunya and his mother what he has done, and then he will turn himself in. He goes to his family's lodgings with this intention. But when he arrives, he finds Razumikhin there, and something in the cheerful atmosphere, in the normalcy of the scene, causes his resolve to crumble. Instead of confessing, he tells them he is going away and asks Razumikhin to watch over them. As he leaves, Razumikhin follows him outside, confused and concerned. Raskolnikov, in a moment of intimacy, tells Razumikhin that he is a good friend and then cryptically adds that Razumikhin will understand everything later. He returns home, utterly exhausted but with his terrible secret still intact. Part 3, Chapter 1. Raskolnikov wakes the next morning to find an unexpected visitor in his room. Razumikhin has brought Dunya and Pulcheria Alexandrovna to see him. The reunion is emotional, with his mother embracing him tearfully while Dunya watches with concern and careful assessment. Razumikhin is clearly smitten with Dunya, though he tries to hide it. He hovers protectively around the family, having taken it upon himself to serve as their guide and protector in St. Petersburg. His devotion is transparent and touching. The conversation is initially awkward. Pulcheria Alexandrovna fusses over her son's health and living conditions. She speaks rapidly, nervously, trying to bridge the gap that has opened between them. Dunya is quieter, more observing, watching her brother with intelligent eyes that miss nothing. They discuss practical matters, Raskolnikov's health, his prospects, the translation work Razumikhin has proposed. But underlying these mundane topics is tremendous tension. Raskolnikov knows what they don't, the terrible thing he has done. This knowledge makes normal family interaction feel surreal and unbearable. The subject of Luzhin inevitably comes up. Pulcheria Alexandrovna mentions that he has been behaving strangely, that he seems offended by something. He has complained about Razumikin's presence and has been making demands about the upcoming wedding that sound increasingly unreasonable. Raskolnikov seizes on this topic. He speaks harshly about Luzhin, making his contempt clear. He tells his sister plainly that the marriage is a mistake, that Luzhin is a petty tyrant who wants a poor wife precisely because she will be in his power. His words are cutting and accurate. Dunya defends her choice with dignity. She is not blind to Luzhin's faults, she says, but she has made her decision carefully and for good reasons. However, her defense is measured, suggesting that perhaps her certainty is not as complete as she claims. The visit is cut short when Luzhin himself arrives. This creates an awkward situation, as Luzhin had specifically requested that Razumikin not be present at his meeting with the family. Raskolnikov's presence also seems to disturb him. Chapter 2. Luzhin's entrance immediately creates tension. He is a man of about 45, with a carefully cultivated appearance that speaks of vanity and self-importance. His clothing is expensive but slightly too fashionable, suggesting someone trying to appear younger and more stylish than he naturally is. He greets the family with a mixture of familiarity and condescension. His manner toward Dunya combines possessiveness with a subtle attempt to establish dominance. He speaks to her as though she were already his property, making assumptions about her thoughts and feelings. Raskolnikov watches this performance with barely concealed contempt. Luzhin, for his part, is clearly uncomfortable with Raskolnikov's presence and makes several comments designed to establish his own superiority and Raskolnikov's dependence. The conversation reveals Luzhin's character with devastating clarity. He speaks at length about his own achievements and prospects, about the apartment he has prepared for himself and his new wife. Everything in his speech centers on himself, with Dunya treated as an acquisition rather than a person. He makes comments that reveal his social and political views. He fancies himself a modern, progressive thinker, though his progressivism is shallow and self-serving. He espouses theories about rational self-interest, arguing that society benefits when everyone pursues their own advantage. His philosophy is essentially a justification for selfishness dressed up in modern language. Raskolnikov challenges him on this, pointing out the logical consequences of his philosophy. If everyone pursues only their own interest, why shouldn't one simply murder and rob if it serves one's purpose? The question is pointed and disturbing, making everyone uncomfortable. Luzhin tries to dismiss it as absurd, but Raskolnikov presses the point. The tension escalates until Luzhin finally demands that Raskolnikov leave his mother and sister's room, as he has private matters to discuss with his fiancée and future mother-in-law. This is a calculated insult, an assertion of authority designed to humiliate Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov responds by insisting that Luzhin is the one who should leave, that this is his mother and sister's room, and Luzhin has no right to make demands. A confrontation seems inevitable. Chapter 3. The confrontation reaches a crisis point. Razumikin, who has been quietly seething at Luzhin's behavior, finally speaks up, supporting Raskolnikov's position. Luzhin realizes he has miscalculated. He thought he could easily dominate this poor family, but he has encountered unexpected resistance. Luzhin attempts to regain control by appealing to Dunya. He makes it clear that he expects her to choose between him and her brother. If she values her relationship with this ungrateful, disrespectful young man more than her future husband, then perhaps they need to reconsider the engagement. This ultimatum backfires. Dunya, who has been quietly observing, speaks up with unexpected firmness. She tells Luzhin that she will not be forced to choose, that his demands are unreasonable, and that she is beginning to doubt whether they are suited for each other. Luzhin is shocked. He had not expected resistance from Dunya. He threatens to leave, expecting this to bring her into line. But Dunya does not back down. She suggests that perhaps a postponement of the wedding would be wise, that they need time to reconsider. Pulcheria Alexandrovna tries to mediate, frightened by the collapse of the engagement that was supposed to secure their future. But even she is disturbed by Luzhin's behavior and supports her daughter, though more hesitantly. Luzhin, realizing he has lost this round, storms out. But as he leaves, he makes it clear that he considers the engagement still valid and expects Dunya to come to her senses and apologize. His parting words are calculated to leave the family in a state of anxious uncertainty. After Luzhin leaves, there is a moment of stunned silence. Then Razumikin, unable to contain himself any longer, bursts into enthusiastic approval. He praises Dunya's courage and independence, his admiration for her clearly visible to everyone in the room. Raskolnikov, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the scene, must leave. But before he does, he makes a strange request. He asks Dunya to promise that she will not marry Luzhin, but also that she will not marry anyone else for a certain period of time. The request is odd and controlling, revealing his own psychological confusion. Chapter 4. Razumikhin escorts Dunya and Pulcheria Alexandrovna back to their own lodgings. During the walk, he can barely contain his feelings for Dunya. He is effusive in his praise of her handling of Luzhin, and though he tries to maintain proper decorum, his romantic interest is transparent. Dunya seems to appreciate his attention without fully reciprocating his feelings. She treats him kindly, but maintains a certain distance. Pulcheria Alexandrovna, however, clearly approves of Razumikhin and seems to hope that her daughter might turn her attention to this good-hearted young man. They discuss Raskolnikov and his strange behavior. Razumikhin tries to explain it as the result of his illness and his difficult circumstances. He speaks passionately about his friend's brilliance and fundamental goodness, trying to help the family understand the brother and son who has become so distant and strange. But even Razumikhin is troubled. He has noticed things about Raskolnikov's behavior that he cannot explain: the odd questions about the murder, the strange moods, the sense that his friend is hiding something terrible. Meanwhile, Raskolnikov has returned to his room where he finds an unexpected visitor waiting for him, Sonya Marmeladova. She has come to invite him to her father's funeral and the memorial dinner that Katerina Ivanovna is organizing despite their poverty. This visit is significant. Sonya is terrified to be in a man's room alone, acutely aware of her degraded social status. She stands just inside the door, unable to look at Raskolnikov directly, speaking in a barely audible whisper. Raskolnikov is moved by her visit. He speaks to her gently, with more warmth than he has shown anyone since the murder. He asks about her family, about Katerina Ivanovna's plans. Sonya explains that Katerina, in her pride and desperation, is determined to give Marmeladov a proper funeral and memorial dinner, even though they have no money. There is something in Sonya's humble, suffering presence that touches Raskolnikov deeply. She represents something he has lost: simple faith, the ability to endure suffering without losing one's humanity. He promises to attend the funeral. After Sonya leaves, Raskolnikov sits alone with his thoughts. The visit has stirred something in him, some possibility of redemption or connection to life. Chapter 5. The next day, Raskolnikov is summoned to see Porfiry Petrovich, the investigating magistrate in charge of the pawnbroker murder case. This is the meeting Raskolnikov has been dreading, a direct confrontation with the man responsible for solving the crime. Razumikhin accompanies him to Porfiry's office. They arrive to find a small, somewhat shabby room where Porfiry receives them. The magistrate is not at all what Raskolnikov expected. He is about 35, with a round face and a jovial, almost frivolous manner. He seems more like a buffoon than a serious investigator. However, Raskolnikov quickly realizes that this apparent frivolity is deceptive. Behind the jokes and the casual manner is a sharp, penetrating intelligence. Porfiry is playing a role, using his seeming foolishness to put people off guard. The ostensible reason for the summons is administrative. Raskolnikov had pawned items with the murdered woman, and Porfiry needs him to file a claim for their return. However, the conversation quickly moves beyond this simple matter. Porfiry brings up an article Raskolnikov published in a journal several months earlier. The article was titled "On Crime" and outlined Raskolnikov's theory about ordinary and extraordinary people. Porfiry has read the article and wants to discuss it. This immediately puts Raskolnikov on the defensive. He realizes that Porfiry knows about his theory, knows about his intellectual framework that could justify murder. The magistrate asks questions that seem casual, but are clearly designed to probe Raskolnikov's psychology. Raskolnikov explains his theory, trying to present it as an abstract philosophical argument. He speaks about extraordinary individuals who have the right to transgress moral boundaries in pursuit of a higher purpose. Porfiry listens with apparent fascination, asking for clarification, pushing Raskolnikov to explain the implications. Chapter 6. The conversation with Porfiry becomes increasingly tense. The magistrate asks whether Raskolnikov believes he himself is one of these extraordinary people who have the right to kill. The question is posed lightly, almost as a joke, but its implications are serious. Raskolnikov manages to deflect, saying that if he thought himself a Napoleon, he certainly wouldn't have published an article about it. The answer is clever, but Porfiry's eyes suggest he is not entirely satisfied with it. Porfiry then shifts tactics. He begins asking seemingly random questions about Raskolnikov's movements on the day of the murder. Did he visit the pawnbroker? Had he been in the building recently? Did he notice anyone else? The questions appear casual, but they are clearly calculated. Raskolnikov realizes he is being interrogated, despite the friendly tone. He tries to remain calm, answering carefully. But Porfiry has a way of making him uncomfortable, of suggesting through tone and implication that he knows more than he is saying. At one point, Porfiry mentions that workmen painting the apartment saw a man matching Raskolnikov's description in the building around the time of the murder. Raskolnikov's heart races, but he manages to explain that he had been there before and might have been recognized from previous visits. The conversation continues for some time, circling around the murder without ever directly accusing Raskolnikov. Porfiry's method is subtle. He plants seeds of doubt, makes observations that could be innocent or loaded with meaning, watches carefully for reactions. Finally, Raskolnikov manages to extricate himself from the interview. As he leaves, Porfiry makes a casual comment about how he hopes Raskolnikov will visit again. There are still some small matters to clear up. The words are friendly, but the implication is clear. Porfiry is not finished with him. Outside, Razumikin is full of praise for how clever Porfiry is, completely oblivious to the psychological duel that has just occurred. Raskolnikov, shaken by the interview, can barely respond. Back in his room, Raskolnikov is visited by an unexpected guest, a middle-aged man, poorly dressed, with a hangdog expression. The man enters hesitantly, looks at Raskolnikov with an odd mixture of fear and accusation, and says a single word: "Murderer." Raskolnikov is stunned. The man, whose name is Mikolka, appears to be one of the painters who was in the building during the murder. Raskolnikov waits for an explanation or accusation, but the man simply bows and leaves without another word. This strange encounter leaves Raskolnikov in a state of extreme agitation. He cannot understand what has just happened or what it means. Part 4. Chapter 1. Raskolnikov's mental state deteriorates further. The encounter with the man who called him a murderer has shaken him profoundly. He can't understand whether this was a genuine accusation, a hallucination, or some strange psychological game. He is visited by Razumikin, who brings news. Luzhin has written an offensive letter to Dunya and Pulcheria Alexandrovna, essentially blaming them for the breakdown of the engagement and making insulting insinuations about Raskolnikov's influence on his sister. Razumikin is furious about the letter and wants to challenge Luzhin. However, Dunya has decided to simply cut off all communication with him. The engagement is definitively over. While this is a relief in one sense, it also means the family is back in a state of financial uncertainty. Razumikin continues to hover around Dunya and her mother, making himself useful in countless ways. His devotion is touching, and Pulcheria Alexandrovna clearly hopes that he and Dunya will form an attachment. Dunya treats him kindly, but remains somewhat reserved. Raskolnikov learns that Marmeladov's funeral is to take place soon, and Katerina Ivanovna has indeed arranged for a memorial dinner despite having almost no money. The family's desperation has reached new depths. Chapter 2. Raskolnikov encounters Sonya on the street. She is agitated, having just received a visit from Luzhin, who came to her room on the pretext of business. Luzhin gave her a 10-ruble note, ostensibly as charity for her family, but his manner was strange and his visit inappropriate. Sonya doesn't understand why Luzhin would visit her, nor why he would give her money. She is frightened by the attention from a respectable man, knowing that her position as a prostitute makes any such attention suspect. Raskolnikov is disturbed by this news. He suspects Luzhin has some scheme in mind, though he cannot yet determine what it might be. He warns Sonya to be careful but doesn't explain his concerns fully. During this encounter, Raskolnikov feels drawn to Sonya. There is something about her suffering, her acceptance of her degraded position for the sake of her family, that speaks to something in him. He asks her to come to his room that evening. He has something important to discuss with her. Sonya is frightened by this request but agrees. The invitation is unusual and potentially compromising, but she trusts Raskolnikov in a way she cannot fully explain. Chapter 3. Raskolnikov prepares for Sonya's visit with strange, nervous energy. He has decided that he will confess to her that she is the person who can understand and perhaps help him. His reasoning is not entirely clear even to himself. He only knows that he feels compelled to share his terrible secret with this suffering girl. When Sonia arrives, she is terrified. Being alone with a man in his room is deeply improper and dangerous for someone in her position. She sits on the edge of a chair, ready to flee at any moment, unable to look at him directly. Raskolnikov begins to question her about her life. He asks how she can continue to live, knowing what she has become, knowing what she must do. His questions are harsh, almost cruel, but they come from genuine confusion about how one endures such degradation. Sonia's answers reveal her character. She does not justify herself or claim to be virtuous. She simply explains that she does what she must for her family, for her stepmother and the young children who would starve otherwise. She knows she is damned, but she accepts this damnation as the price of their survival. Raskolnikov asks what she lives for, what keeps her going. Sonia's answer is immediate: God. This simple declaration of faith coming from someone in such circumstances is both moving and frustrating to Raskolnikov. He cannot understand how she maintains belief in a God who allows such suffering. He asks her to read from the Bible. She produces a worn copy that had belonged to Lizaveta, the pawnbroker's murdered sister. This revelation, that Sonia and Lizaveta were friends, is significant and painful. Raskolnikov insists she read the story of Lazarus, the man Jesus raised from the dead. Sonia reads, her voice becoming stronger and more passionate as she continues. The story of resurrection, of someone dead being brought back to life, resonates deeply with both of them, though they understand it differently. For Sonia, it is literal truth and a promise. For Raskolnikov, it is a metaphor for the possibility of redemption, of psychological rebirth. Chapter 4. As Sonia finishes reading, Raskolnikov is on the verge of confessing. He looks at her suffering, faithful face and feels he can share his burden with her. But before he can speak, there is a knock at the door. Lebeziatnikov, a neighbor and acquaintance, enters without invitation. He is a young man full of progressive ideas and radical theories, the kind of person who adopts every new ideology with enthusiasm. He has come to remind Sonia about Katerina Ivanovna's memorial dinner and to share some theoretical observations about the rights of women and the artificiality of social conventions. His interruption breaks the moment, and Sonia hurries away. Raskolnikov is left frustrated, having been unable to make his confession. However, he tells her as she leaves that he will visit her tomorrow. He has something important to tell her. After Sonia departs, Raskolnikov is visited again, this time by Porfiry Petrovich. The magistrate has come unofficially, he says, just to clear up a few small matters and to continue their interesting conversation. What follows is a cat-and-mouse game of extraordinary psychological intensity. Porfiry is ostensibly friendly, chatting about various topics, but his every word carries hidden meanings. He discusses theories of crime, psychology, the nature of guilt. He seems to be lecturing Raskolnikov on the psychology of criminals. Porfiry describes how criminals inevitably reveal themselves through their behavior. They cannot help but return to the scene of the crime, cannot stop talking about it, cannot resist taking risks. He speaks as though discussing an abstract case, but both men know he is talking about Raskolnikov. The magistrate mentions that the painters who were arrested have been released. There was no evidence against them. However, one of them, Nikolai, has suddenly confessed to the murder. This confession is clearly false. Porfiry knows it, and he knows Raskolnikov knows it. But the existence of a confession complicates the case. Porfiry suggests that the real murderer is probably an intellectual, someone who has rationalized the crime through some theory or philosophy. He describes a person very much like Raskolnikov, young, poor, brilliant, consumed by a theory that has led him to murder. Throughout this conversation, Raskolnikov maintains his composure, though the strain is enormous. He answers carefully, trying neither to reveal too much nor to appear evasive. But Porfiry's method is insidious. He doesn't need a confession, he simply needs to let Raskolnikov know that he is suspected, that he is being watched, that there is no escape. Finally, Porfiry leaves, but not before making it clear that he will be back. He suggests that Raskolnikov should not try to leave the city, should remain available for further questioning. The words are phrased as friendly advice, but their meaning is unmistakable. Chapter 5. After Porfiry leaves, Raskolnikov is in a state of extreme agitation. He feels trapped, certain that the magistrate knows everything and is simply toying with him. The psychological pressure is becoming unbearable. He is surprised by another visitor, Svidrigailov, the man who had made improper advances to his sister Dunya when she worked in his household. Svidrigailov's sudden appearance in St. Petersburg is unexpected and troubling. Svidrigailov is a man of about 50, still handsome, but with something unsettling in his appearance. He has a reputation for debauchery and moral corruption, though his manner is polite and even charming. He enters Raskolnikov's room with easy familiarity, as though they were old friends. He explains that he has come to St. Petersburg following his wife's death. Marfa Petrovna, the woman who had cleared Dunya's reputation, died suddenly, of a stroke, according to the doctors. However, Svidrigailov's manner suggests something more sinister might have occurred. Svidrigailov claims that Marfa's ghost has visited him several times since her death. He speaks of this supernatural occurrence matter-of-factly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Raskolnikov cannot tell if the man is serious or mocking him. The purpose of Svidrigailov's visit is to discuss Dunya. He claims that he has come to Petersburg partly to pursue her, to offer her marriage now that he is free. He speaks of his love for her, but there is something disturbing in the way he discusses her, a sense of ownership, of viewing her as an object to be acquired. Svidrigailov also reveals that he knows about Raskolnikov's crime. He doesn't say how he knows, but he makes it clear that he has overheard enough to understand what Raskolnikov has done. This revelation is shocking and terrifying. However, Svidrigailov assures Raskolnikov that he has no intention of going to the authorities. In fact, he suggests that they are kindred spirits, both have transgressed moral boundaries, both are beyond conventional morality. This comparison is deeply disturbing to Raskolnikov. Chapter 6. The memorial dinner for Marmeladov takes place in the cramped Marmeladov apartment. Katerina Ivanovna has spent far beyond her means to create an impression of respectability. There is food, vodka, attempts at proper table settings, all pathetically inadequate but representing her desperate pride. The guests are a collection of the poor and the marginal, people who have come primarily for the free food and drink. Katerina plays the hostess with manic energy, trying to maintain an air of gentility and propriety that becomes increasingly hysterical. Sonya sits quietly, trying to be invisible. Her presence is an embarrassment to Katerina, who wants to present her family as respectable. The bright clothing that marks Sonya's profession makes her conspicuous despite her attempts to hide. Luzhin makes an unexpected appearance at the dinner. His presence is odd. He had no connection to Marmeladov and no reason to be there. He makes a show of propriety, offering condolences, but his manner is strange and calculated. During the dinner, Luzhin suddenly makes a shocking accusation. He claims that 100 rubles has been stolen from his pocket, and he suggests that Sonya took it. He says that when he visited her room to give her 10 rubles for the family, she must have picked his pocket. The accusation creates chaos. Katerina initially defends Sonya, but Luzhin is insistent. He demands that Sonya's pockets be searched. When this is done, a 100-ruble note is indeed found in one of her pockets. Sonya is devastated, unable to understand how the money got there. She weeps, protesting her innocence, but the evidence seems clear. Katerina, despite her earlier defense, begins to turn on Sonya, her hysteria and desperation finding a target. It is Lebeziatnikov, the radical young man, who saves the situation. He steps forward and announces that he saw Luzhin plant the money in Sonya's pocket. He had been standing near the door and observed Luzhin secretly slip the note into her pocket while pretending to say goodbye. This revelation transforms the situation. Luzhin's scheme is exposed. He had planned to discredit Sonya and, through her, to embarrass Raskolnikov's family, taking revenge for the broken engagement. His plan was to demonstrate that Raskolnikov and his family associate with thieves and prostitutes, justifying his own decision to break off the engagement. Luzhin tries to bluster and deny, but Lebeziatnikov's testimony is too clear. He is exposed as a scoundrel and driven from the apartment in disgrace. Sonya is vindicated, though the trauma of the false accusation has shaken her deeply. Katerina Ivanovna, in her agitated state, begins to rant about Luzhin, about their poverty, about the injustices she has suffered. Her illness and the stress of the day have pushed her beyond rational control. She announces that she will take the children into the streets to beg. They will show Petersburg what has become of a respectable family. The dinner ends in complete chaos. Katerina drags the children out into the street, determined to make a public spectacle of their suffering. Sonya follows, trying to calm her stepmother but unable to stop her. Raskolnikov, who has witnessed these events, follows Sonya when she leaves. He has decided that now is the moment to make his confession. Part 5. Chapter 1. Raskolnikov follows Sonya to her room. The space is small and shabby, with odd angles because the building's walls are irregular. It is separate from the Marmeladov apartment, but in the same building, a room that Sonya rents for her profession, keeping her degradation physically separate from her family while still being available to them. She is surprised by his arrival but lets him in. He can see that she is still shaken from the ordeal at the dinner, from being falsely accused and then vindicated. Her hands tremble as she tries to compose herself. Raskolnikov begins to speak. He tells Sonya that he has come to explain who killed the old pawnbroker and her sister Lizaveta. Sonya doesn't understand at first, thinking he means to provide information about the case. She waits for him to continue. Then, after a pause that seems to stretch forever, he tells her directly, "I killed them." Sonya's reaction is complex. She seems to have suspected something, though not exactly this. She looks at him with horror but also with compassion. She asks why, how he could have done such a thing. She backs away from him but doesn't flee. Raskolnikov begins to explain his theory. The division between ordinary and extraordinary people, the justification for transgression in pursuit of a higher purpose. But even as he speaks, he realizes how hollow these intellectual justifications sound. The theory that seemed so compelling in the abstract reveals itself as grotesque when applied to actual human murder. He also tries to explain his practical motivations: the poverty, the need to help his family, the old woman's worthlessness. But these justifications also ring false. He knows, even as he speaks them, that they are not the real reason. Finally, he admits a deeper truth. He killed to test himself, to prove he was extraordinary, to see if he could transgress moral boundaries without being destroyed. He wanted to know if he was a Napoleon or a louse. The murder was essentially an experiment in his own psychology. Chapter 2. Sonya listens to this confession with tears streaming down her face. She understands that Raskolnikov has destroyed himself, that the murder has not proven his strength, but rather has revealed his fundamental humanity. The extraordinary man he wanted to be would not have suffered as he is suffering. She asks about Lizaveta, the innocent woman who was killed. Raskolnikov admits that her death was unplanned, a panicked response to being discovered. This makes the crime even more terrible, the murder of an innocent person, someone Sonya had known and liked. Sonya's response to the confession is remarkable. Despite the horror of what she has learned, her primary emotion is compassion. She sees Raskolnikov suffering and wants to help him. She asks what he will do now, how he can live with what he has done. Raskolnikov's answer reveals his continued confusion. He doesn't know what to do. Part of him wants to confess publicly, to turn himself in and accept punishment. But another part of him still clings to his theory, still resents the idea of submitting to conventional morality. Sonya tells him that he must confess, that he must accept his punishment, and through suffering find redemption. She speaks from her own experience. She has been degraded, has sinned, but maintains faith that God will forgive. She believes the same possibility exists for Raskolnikov if he will accept his guilt and suffer for it. The conversation is interrupted by a knock at the door. Lebeziatnikov enters, bringing news. Katerina Ivanovna has collapsed in the street. Her madness and her illness have reached a crisis point. She has been dragging the children around Petersburg, forcing them to beg and perform for passers-by, until she finally collapsed, coughing blood. Raskolnikov and Sonya rush to where Katerina has been taken. They find a scene of tragedy. Katerina is dying, coughing up blood, surrounded by the frightened children. She is delirious, speaking of her past, of her noble family, of her education. In her final moments, she retreats into memories of a better time, before poverty and degradation destroyed her. A priest is summoned, but Katerina dies before she can receive last rites, her mind full of confused memories and desperate pride. Sonya weeps over her stepmother's body, while the three young children huddle together in terror, not fully understanding what has happened. Chapter 3. After Katerina's death, there is the question of what will happen to the children. They cannot be left alone, but Sonya has no means to support them. The situation seems hopeless. It is at this point that Svidrigailov reappears. He has been present during Katerina's death, watching from the edge of the crowd. Now he steps forward with an offer. He will provide money for the children to be sent to an orphanage and will set up a fund to ensure they are cared for until they come of age. He will also provide for Katerina's funeral and memorial. This offer is both generous and disturbing. Svidrigailov's motives are unclear. He seems genuinely moved by the tragedy, but there is also something self-serving in his charity. He mentions that he is acting partly in memory of his late wife, who had been fond of charitable works. Raskolnikov is suspicious of Svidrigailov's sudden generosity. He wonders what the man wants in return, what scheme he might be planning. But the immediate crisis is resolved. The children will be cared for. Svidrigailov also tells Raskolnikov that he has been present in the next room during Raskolnikov's confession to Sonya. The walls are thin, and he overheard everything. This revelation is shocking. Raskolnikov's secret is now known to this morally dubious man. However, Svidrigailov assures Raskolnikov that he will not go to the authorities. He claims to feel a kinship with Raskolnikov, to understand his motivations. This claimed understanding is more disturbing than a threat would be. Chapter 4. Raskolnikov realizes that his situation is becoming untenable. Too many people now know or suspect his guilt. Sonya knows, Svidrigailov knows, Porfiry suspects. The web is tightening around him. He visits his family, his mother and sister. The meeting is painful. Pulcheria Alexandrovna is full of maternal concern, fussing over his health and circumstances. Dunya watches him with worried, penetrating eyes. Raskolnikov tries to act normally, but the strain is visible. He speaks to them about practical matters, their future, their finances. Razumikin is there as well, and Raskolnikov asks him to watch over his mother and sister, to take care of them. There is a quality of farewell to the visit, though Raskolnikov doesn't explicitly say he is leaving. Dunya senses something is wrong, that her brother is preparing for something. She tries to question him, but he deflects her concerns. Raskolnikov also has a final meeting with Razumikin. He thanks his friend for his loyalty and help. He tells Razumikin that he is a good person, one of the best people he has known. There is deep emotion in these words, a recognition of true friendship. He then goes to see Porfiry Petrovich. This visit is his own choice. The magistrate has not summoned him. Raskolnikov has decided to confront the investigator directly, to end the psychological torture of waiting and suspicion. Chapter 5. The meeting with Porfiry is the climactic confrontation between detective and criminal. Porfiry greets Raskolnikov with his usual joviality, but both men know this is a decisive moment. Porfiry begins by revealing what he knows. He explains his methods, how he has studied Raskolnikov's psychology, how he has understood the theory that motivated the murder, how he has watched Raskolnikov's behavior and seen the guilt eating away at him. The magistrate describes the typical pattern of the intellectual criminal, the elaborate justification, the belief in one's own superiority, the inability to actually live with the crime once committed. He speaks as though lecturing on an abstract case, but both men know he is describing Raskolnikov exactly. Porfiry reveals that he knew Raskolnikov was guilty almost from the beginning. The false confession from Nikolai the painter did not fool him for a moment. He knew it was a lie to cover for the real criminal, motivated by religious fanaticism and a desire for suffering. However, Porfiry also reveals that he lacks concrete proof. The case against Raskolnikov is psychological, not evidentiary. He could not convict in a court of law based on what he has. This is why he has been pursuing a psychological strategy, trying to pressure Raskolnikov into confessing. Porfiry makes an extraordinary offer. If Raskolnikov will confess voluntarily, the magistrate will ensure that the circumstances are presented as favorably as possible. He will argue for leniency, will emphasize Raskolnikov's youth and the temporary insanity that led to the crime. A voluntary confession will result in a much lighter sentence than if Raskolnikov is eventually caught through other means. He gives Raskolnikov 2 days to decide. If he does not confess voluntarily in that time, Porfiry will be forced to arrest him and let the case proceed through normal channels, which will result in a much harsher punishment. The conversation ends with Porfiry making a final philosophical observation. Suffering and punishment are not merely legal concepts, but psychological necessities. A person who has committed such a crime cannot live normally without accepting responsibility and undergoing punishment. The suffering is not just imposed from outside, but is demanded by the criminal's own nature. Raskolnikov leaves this meeting in a state of mental turmoil. The decision before him is clear: confess voluntarily and receive relative leniency, or wait to be caught and face harsher consequences. Part 6. Chapter 1. After his meeting with Porfiry, Raskolnikov wanders the streets in a daze. He still cannot decide what to do. Part of him wants to confess and end the torture of suspense and guilt, but another part still resists, still clings to his theory and his pride. He encounters Svidrigailov, who invites him to a tavern. Over drinks, Svidrigailov begins to tell his story, revealing more of his past and his moral philosophy. Svidrigailov speaks of his life with his late wife, Marfa Petrovna. Their marriage had been a strange arrangement. She had bought him out of debtor's prison early in their relationship, establishing a financial power over him that never quite disappeared. He had been unfaithful numerous times, and she had always forgiven him, partly out of love and partly because she enjoyed the power of forgiveness. He mentions other crimes and transgressions in his past, speaking of them matter-of-factly, without apparent guilt. There are hints of darker deeds: a young girl who committed suicide, a servant who may have been murdered. Svidrigailov doesn't confirm these crimes, but he doesn't deny them either. Throughout this confession, Svidrigailov continues to claim that he and Raskolnikov are alike, both have transgressed, both have killed. But Raskolnikov rejects this comparison vehemently. Whatever he has done, he insists, he is not like Svidrigailov. Svidrigailov also reveals his plans for Dunya. He intends to offer her marriage, to provide her with wealth and security. He seems to genuinely believe that she might accept him, despite everything that has passed between them. Chapter 2. Svidrigailov has arranged a meeting with Dunya, under false pretenses. He has sent her a letter suggesting that he has important information about her brother, something that could save Raskolnikov from arrest. Intrigued and worried, Dunya agrees to meet him privately. The meeting takes place in Svidrigailov's rooms. When Dunya arrives, she is immediately uncomfortable with the situation. Being alone with Svidrigailov in his apartment is improper and potentially dangerous, but her concern for her brother overrides her caution. Svidrigailov begins by telling her what he knows about Raskolnikov's crime. He explains that he overheard the confession to Sonia, that he knows Raskolnikov is the murderer. This revelation shocks Dunya, though something in her has suspected that her brother was hiding a terrible secret. Svidrigailov then makes his proposal. He will help Raskolnikov escape. He has money and connections. He can arrange for Raskolnikov to leave the country, to start a new life abroad where he will be safe from prosecution. But there is a price for this help. Dunya must agree to marry him. Dunya is horrified by this proposal. She refuses absolutely. She tells Svidrigailov that she could never marry him, that his actions have proven him to be without moral character. Even to save her brother, she cannot sacrifice herself to such a man. Svidrigailov, who had perhaps convinced himself that Dunya might accept, becomes increasingly agitated as she continues to refuse. His manner changes from persuasive to threatening. He reminds her that they are alone, that the door is locked, that no one knows she is here. Dunya realizes the danger she is in. She produces a revolver that she had brought, anticipating that the meeting might be dangerous. She points it at Svidrigailov and demands that he let her go. Chapter 3. Svidrigailov is fascinated by the fact that Dunya has a gun. He approaches her, daring her to shoot. There is something almost suicidal in his manner, as though he wants her to kill him. Dunya fires. The shot misses. She fires again. The bullet grazes Svidrigailov's head but does not seriously injure him. She tries to fire a third time, but the gun misfires. Svidrigailov could now easily overpower her, but something in her determined resistance breaks through to him. He sees clearly that she will never consent, that she would rather die than submit to him. This recognition of her absolute refusal finally penetrates his obsession. He unlocks the door and lets her go. Dunya flees, leaving Svidrigailov alone in his room. He stands there for a long time, blood trickling from the graze on his head, holding the revolver she left behind. Something has changed in Svidrigailov. The rejection has been absolute and final, destroying whatever hope or delusion had been sustaining him. He makes some financial arrangements, ensuring that the money he promised for the Marmeladov children is delivered. He visits his young fiancée. He had been engaged to a girl of 15 in a cynical arrangement, and breaks off the engagement, leaving her family with a generous financial gift. He spends the evening wandering Petersburg, his behavior becoming increasingly strange. He gives money to various people he encounters, makes odd comments, seems to be saying goodbye to the world. As night falls, he takes a room in a cheap hotel. The room is squalid and he lies on the bed, unable to sleep. He has strange dreams and hallucinations, visions of Marfa Petrovna's ghost, images of the young girl who committed suicide because of him. Chapter 4. In the early morning before dawn, Svidrigailov leaves the hotel. He walks through the empty streets to a quiet spot near the Never River. There, with no witnesses except a sleepy guard, he puts the revolver to his head and pulls the trigger. Svidrigailov's suicide is presented without commentary or explanation. Dostoyevsky leaves it to the reader to understand what led to this final act. Perhaps it was the complete rejection by Dunya, the recognition that he could never change or be redeemed. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of his crimes and transgressions. Perhaps it was simply a moment of clarity about the emptiness of his existence. Meanwhile, Raskolnikov is unaware of Svidrigaïlov's death. He is struggling with his own decision about whether to confess. Sonia has been urging him to turn himself in, to accept his punishment, and begin the path toward redemption. Raskolnikov visits Sonia. She is preparing to follow him wherever he goes, to Siberia. If that is where he is sent, her devotion is absolute, though there has been no romantic relationship between them. She sees his suffering and wants to help him bear it. Sonia gives Raskolnikov a small wooden cross to wear. She tells him that when he confesses, he should kiss the earth and ask forgiveness from all people. This gesture of humble repentance is foreign to Raskolnikov's nature, but Sonia insists it is necessary for his spiritual healing. Chapter 5. Raskolnikov makes a final visit to his mother and sister. Dunya has told Pulcheria about Raskolnikov's crime, wanting to prepare her for what is coming. The mother's reaction is complex. She seems to understand and yet not understand, to accept and yet deny. The farewell is heartbreaking. Raskolnikov sees his mother's love and suffering, recognizes what his actions have cost her. She is aged and weakened, and there is a sense that this shock may be too much for her fragile health. Dunya is stronger. She embraces her brother with a fierce love, promising that she will never abandon him, that she will wait for him no matter how long his punishment lasts. There is also a new understanding between them. She now knows the full weight of what he has been carrying. Razumikin is there as well, and Raskolnikov can see that his friend and his sister have developed feelings for each other. This provides some comfort. At least Dunya will not be alone, and his mother will have someone to care for her. From there, Raskolnikov goes to the police station. Along the way, he encounters various people going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. The mundane reality of the city continues regardless of individual tragedy. He remembers Sonia's instruction to kiss the earth and ask forgiveness. At a crossroads, he bends down and kisses the ground. Some passers-by laugh at him, thinking he is drunk. He rises and continues toward the police station. At the station, he meets Ilya Petrovich and begins to make his confession. However, at that moment, news arrives of Svidrigaïlov's suicide. The police are distracted by this development, and there is confusion in the office. Raskolnikov nearly leaves without confessing, his resolve wavering. But as he descends the stairs, he sees Sonia waiting for him. Her presence reminds him of his decision. He turns around, goes back up the stairs, and tells Ilya Petrovich, "It was I who killed the old pawnbroker woman and her sister Lizaveta with an axe and robbed them." Epilogue. Part 1. The epilogue begins by summarizing the legal proceedings. Raskolnikov's trial is relatively brief. His voluntary confession, his youth, and evidence of his previous charitable actions work in his favor. There is also testimony about his mental state at the time of the crime. Medical experts testify that he was suffering from a kind of monomania, an obsessive psychological state bordering on temporary insanity. This doesn't excuse the crime, but it provides mitigating circumstances. The court also considers the strange nature of his theft. He took relatively few items and never used most of them, suggesting that robbery was not his primary motive. The sentence is 8 years of hard labor in Siberia. This is considerably lighter than it might have been, partly because of the voluntary confession and partly because of the circumstances. Raskolnikov's mother does not survive long after the trial. Her mental and physical health deteriorates rapidly. She develops a kind of delusional state where she speaks of her son's success and achievements, unable to accept the reality of his crime and punishment. She dies within a few months of his departure for Siberia. Dunya marries Razumikin, who has proven his devotion and worth. They make plans to eventually move to Siberia to be near Raskolnikov when he completes his sentence. Razumikin continues his business and does well, showing that honest work and perseverance can lead to success without the need for transgression. Sonia follows Raskolnikov to Siberia. She settles in the town near the prison and visits him when permitted. She also becomes known among the convicts and the local community for her gentle kindness, earning respect despite her past. Part 2. The final section of the epilogue takes place in Siberia, more than a year into Raskolnikov's sentence. He is in a prison hospital, recovering from an illness. Sonia visits him regularly, bringing small comforts and news from the outside world. Raskolnikov's time in prison has been difficult in unexpected ways. His physical suffering is considerable. The hard labor, the poor conditions, the harsh climate. But his psychological suffering is even greater. He finds that he cannot connect with the other convicts. Most of them are simple criminals without his intellectual pretensions. They sense his pride and aloofness and resent him for it. There have been incidents where other prisoners threatened violence against him because they found his attitude offensive. Ironically, these simple criminals are fond of Sonya. They respect her humility and kindness, while they despise Raskolnikov's pride. This reversal troubles him. The uneducated murderers and thieves are better able to accept grace and redemption than he, with all his theories and intelligence. Raskolnikov has not yet truly repented. He regrets being caught, regrets the suffering his actions caused his family, but he doesn't regret the murder itself in the way that would allow for true redemption. He still sometimes thinks that his only mistake was confessing, that he should have been stronger and resisted the pressure. His relationship with Sonya is complex. He knows she loves him and has sacrificed everything to follow him to Siberia. But he cannot fully return her love or accept what she represents: faith, humility, acceptance of suffering. He is grateful to her but also sometimes resentful of her presence, which reminds him of his failure. Part 3. The final scene of the novel takes place by a river in Siberia. Raskolnikov is ill and has been granted permission to rest outside. He sits on the riverbank, looking across at the vast steppe that stretches to the horizon. On the other side of the river, nomadic peoples live in their traditional way, as though time has not touched them. Raskolnikov has a sudden vision or realization. He looks at this unchanged landscape and thinks about eternal things, about life that continues regardless of individual human drama. In this moment, something shifts within him. Sonya comes to sit beside him. He looks at her and suddenly sees her differently, not just as a symbol or a reminder of his guilt, but as a person, as someone who loves him. For the first time, he allows himself to feel love for her in return. He takes her hand, and they both weep. In this moment, Raskolnikov experiences the beginning of true repentance and redemption. He doesn't articulate it in words, but he feels that his old life, the life of pride and theory, has died and something new is beginning. The novel ends with a sense of hope, though it is a hope that must be earned through continued suffering and growth. Raskolnikov still has 7 years of his sentence to serve. The path to full redemption will be long and difficult, but the possibility now exists where before there was only deadness. The final words indicate that this transformation, the story of Raskolnikov's gradual renewal, could be the subject of another tale. But Dostoyevsky leaves it there, at the moment of initial awakening, allowing readers to imagine the difficult journey of redemption that lies ahead. Conclusion: Crime and Punishment is a profound exploration of guilt, redemption, morality, and the human psyche. Through Raskolnikov's journey from murder to confession to the first stirrings of spiritual renewal, Dostoyevsky examines fundamental questions about human nature, the limits of rationality, and the possibility of redemption even for those who have committed terrible crimes. The novel demonstrates that intellectual theories divorced from human compassion lead to monstrous conclusions, that suffering can be redemptive when accepted with humility, and that love and faith offer possibilities that pure reason cannot achieve. It remains one of literature's most powerful psychological and moral explorations, as relevant today as when it was written in 1866.